This episode of the Linux Action Show is brought to you by the good-looking folks at GoDaddy.com. Use our code Linux and save yourself some cash. And welcome to the Linux Action Show, Season 19, Episode 7, recorded and released November 27th, 2011, live from a very rainy Pacific Northwest. My name is Chris.
And my name is Alan.
Hey there, Alan. Welcome back to the big show. And we should say thanks to Alan's company, Scale Engine, this week for providing awesome live streaming. And you can find that over at jblive.tv, and you can join our live chat room right there as they go along and share their thoughts with us. And we've got a great episode. I love doing this. It's our second annual open source projects and developers we are thankful for. We did this just about a year ago last year, right around Thanksgiving time. It was, if you can believe it, just a year ago was Season 14, Episode 8. So here we are on Season 19, Episode 7.
Yeah.
And the whole world comes around, and we're doing it again. Tis the season. And really, you know, I wrote this down because it really is truly how I feel. I wanted to make sure I got this right. We just want to give a big hug to open source projects and developers that we're thankful for this week, because Alan and I and Randall, who'll be joining us later, we stand on the shoulders of these giants every single day. And, you know, these open source projects and developers honestly have helped us make our careers and made our daily lives easier to manage.
Yeah.
And so one episode out of the year to say thanks to these guys, I think is the absolute bare minimum we could do.
For sure.
Plus, later on in the show, in the news segment, we're going to talk about Mint 12 and some of the new features that are coming up in Mint 12, as well as the massive shot in the arm that open source gaming got this week. I'm extremely excited about that. Plus, at the end of the news docket, I'll tell you about the biggest little distribution in the world and how it just got a big update. But before we do that, why don't I show you my runs Linux this week, because I am hopeful. It's not quite yet running Linux, but you know, sometimes we like to look ahead, and it's called the Game Gadget, and it's going to be maybe a Nintendo DS killer. It looks a lot like the old Game Boy. It's got your standard controls on both sides, and it looks a little bit like an older school Game Boy, but it's going to be hopefully priced around $160, run Linux, and come with an app store where the games can be offered for download directly onto the device. So we'll see.
Nice.
You know, the $160 price puts it right between the 3DS and the DS. So it's like right in the middle. It's going to be the game catalog, and I just don't know. But they're supposedly making this whole infrastructure for people to develop games on top of. So we'll see where it goes. So hopefully, if this is ever a shipping product, I get it in my hot little hands for $160. I'll pick one up, and we'll review it on the show.
Cool.
Now, before we get to my Android pick this week and the Universal pick this week, I want to say good morning to the beautiful Danica Patrick and GoDaddy.com, the world's #1 domain name and registrar. And GoDaddy.com has an epic deal for the Linux Action Show viewer. If you use our code Linux11, that's a new code. It only works till the end of December. Check this out. Brace yourselves. Get ready. $1.99 hosting for 3 months. I said that. $1.99 for hosting for 3 months. You could put anything you want up there.
That's as close to free as you're ever going to get.
Dude, if you've ever had an idea for something you want to do, this is the time to do it. Plus, if you're just checking out, you just want to get some domain names or something like that, use our code Linux, Linux, when you check out. Save 10%. If you want to get some other hosting, maybe spice things up for the long term, Linux20. Save 20% on that checkout. Boom! Boom!
Yes.
Yeah. I know. You're big fans of GoDaddy. We're both big fans of GoDaddy. Huge supporters of the network. So thanks to GoDaddy. They're always working on deals for you guys. They got another one coming up, but jump on this one while it's available. Because honestly, how many times, seriously, are they going to give out hosting for $1.99? I mean,
very often.
They'll probably have a deal in the future, but I doubt it's going to be $1.99.
It's a Christmas present. Just take it.
A Christmas present from GoDaddy. I like it. All right. Well, let me show you my Android app pick this week. And, you know, it does cost some money. And it's been a while since I've done an Android app pick that costs money. And I realize this app pick might not be applicable to everybody out there. But I think those of you who find this useful will be very thankful I picked this one. And I'll give you the use case scenario I picked for it after I tell you what it is. It's called Easy PDF Reader. It was recommended to me by, let me get his name. Let me get his name because he was a nice Redditor. It was
Jason
recommended.
John Wells.
Thank you, sir. Jesse, what?
Jason John Wells.
Jason John Wells, who's also submitted some other great stuff. I've mentioned him before on the show.
Yep.
Easy PDF reader, though. What I like about it, besides being, a PDF reader, which is not all that exciting, what it does do is it lets you highlight sections of PDFs, and it also lets you annotate, save that back to the PDF, and then send it off. So, like, if you had a form you needed to fill out on your smartphone or on your tablet, you can use this to actually edit the PDF fields, then send it off. That's awesome. But here was my usage scenario for this. I love this. The annotation features. You pair this with something like Dropbox, right? Okay. And you put like tech manuals or other things that you need to reference in a folder in Dropbox that are PDFs. Then you can use this program to annotate the important parts of the manual. So when you're like at the rack working on a computer or server, you whip the phone out and you got your highlights of your important commands and you're done.
Yep.
Very handy.
Or, so I thought it can be other stuff. Like I have motherboard manuals for servers. And it's like, they're like 150 pages or whatever. And I need to jump to the page that talks about what the different light codes for the problem display mean. Right?
Yes.
If it's like 1, 4, and 7 are on, what does that mean?
Yeah, that's a great
Pulling
example.
that up on your phone is perfect. That's a really cool idea.
It is. It's a neat app, and it's like $2, so it's not too bad. Link to the show notes. I know I mentioned this every episode.
That's something I'm going to put on my phone.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's like one of those things when you do need it, it's great. I know I mention this every episode. The link to all of the past picks is in the show notes, and thanks to Mad Joe, who is fighting through some streaming issues today to be here so he can get those links updated for you guys. Mad Joe keeps a list updated in the show notes of every episode of the Linux Action Show if you want to get those. So there you go, a link to that in the show notes. Now, my universal pick this week isn't an app. It's not even a website. It's a distribution that's been completely off my radar until this last week, and I wanted to point you folks to it, because if some of you have caught our haiku coverage before, you might find this one particularly interesting. Now, it's called Zevin OS, I'm going to go for.
Yep.
What do you think? Yeah, Zevin. Okay.
Zevin.
And it's a Linux distribution. It uses XFCE as its underpinnings for the desktop, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute. And it uses XFCE 4.8, which means that like the Thunar file manager has Samba and FTP support built in. It comes with OpenShot 1.4 for video editing. And but take a look at the screenshots. If you're listening and not watching the video version, I'll describe it for you too. But these screenshots, to me, here I'll give you a big one. Scream BOS. It looks like they put a really great like haiku BOS theme on this thing. And if you kind of dig that look, it's XFCE with the BOS haiku theme, but done really well. Like the guy spent extra time on this, and so you got to imagine it's probably nice and snappy, a small little distribution running on top of XFCE. It uses Ubuntu 11.10 as the underlying Linux distro that it's based on, so you get all the stuff that Ubuntu has, plus this cool look to it. That's cool. Zevin OS. Pretty cool. Link to that in the show notes. And I haven't tried it myself. I just found out about it this week. I believe that came through the Reddit too. If you would like to check it out, link in the show notes to get the distro. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments because I am tempted to throw this on a box, but I got so many other things to do, so I got to know. But pretty neat little distro. All right, Alan, before we go, I did mention the Reddit page a couple of times. You can find that over at linuxactionshow.reddit.com, and that is the awesomest place out there right now for Linux news. And I might be bragging a little bit, but honestly, I come here, and some of the stuff is like, here's an example. On a Sunday morning, 2 hours ago, Mark Shuttleworth proclaims the whole patent system is effed up. And that's a great submission right there.
Yeah, we've been saying that for a while.
Yeah, I know. But, it's like 3 minutes ago. Just look, there's like stuff is so fresh in here, and it's Linux news. So you go in here, you get some of the greatest Linux news anyways, even some stuff that doesn't make it into the show. And you can also leave comments like I have in there and things like that.
And if you find something missing, submit it.
Yeah. That's always a great way to get something into the show. So go to linuxactionshow.reddit.com if you want to join that community. We have about 405 people in there, and I think we could maybe add another 400. You think, Alan? Yeah.
I think so.
All right, Alan. Well, that's all I have for the beginning picks. Let's do the news. All right, Alan. The top story on the news docket.
To do the news.
That's right. That's what that obnoxious sound that I make means. It is time to do the news. And the top story on the news docket for this week is Linux Mint 12 is released. Fanboy dance. Yeah. Okay, so honestly, I'm a little biased here. I love Linux Mint.
This is me being excited.
Wow. It looks kind of like just when you're not excited, only your hands move.
Yep, basically.
All right, let's talk about Linux Mint 12. I know I've covered a little bit in the show before, but if you go with the default Linux Mint 12 that just came out, Lisa as it's named, you get GNOME 3 and that MGSE software that we talked about before, which gives GNOME 3 a bottom panel and an application menu, which I'll show you a screenshot here in just a second, and a window list, and things like tray icons. Here's
all
a screenshot.
All the things you're kind of looking for, right?
Exactly, in a normal desktop. Here's a screenshot of the new menu. I've literally played with this for about 30 minutes. I have it just installed. I really don't have...
Well, it just came out like last night, right? So.
Yeah, like 2 days ago or something. So I don't have much of an opinion. But in the next Linux Action Show, I'll run it for a week and change, and we'll give you a full review in Season 19, Episode 8 of Linux Action Show of Mint 12. So tune in next Sunday for a complete review of Mint 12. But here's a few overviews. So here's the new menu system. This is part of GNOME 3. It kind of looks like an older version of or newer version of the GNOME 2 menu that Mint always had. So if you're familiar with that, audio listeners, that's what it kind of looks like. Only it's been more GNOME 3'd. It's darker, a little more organized. Mint. So if you look at the Mint desktop, you can also, if you just want to bail on the whole GNOME 3 situation, it also comes with Mate, and that is a completely GNOME 3 compatible. Like it can coexist with GNOME 3, but it's GNOME 2 fork, and that's what's great about Mate is it's a Mate with GNOME 3. You get it?
Right.
It's cute. So you can use Mate as if you just want to bail on a whole GNOME 3 experience, and you get a more traditional standard GNOME 2 desktop that you've come to know and love over the years. So if you're just not ready yet, that's pretty good. Now, you can also get things like codecs and things like that with Mint. Yep. You can also download the non-codeced up version of Mint 12, which is good if you are a little concerned about those issues. Anyways, I'll give you a full review next week. There's one other sort of interesting addendum to the Mint 12 release that I don't think I'll work into the review, so I'll go ahead and cover it now. And that is that they signed an official deal with DuckDuckGo. Mint now has a partnership, an ad rev partnership with DuckDuckGo. If you're not familiar with DuckDuckGo, it's actually a really great search engine that's really big on not tracking you. And they also don't do the personalized search where they don't show you some results based on what they think about you.
Right, so they don't track you, so they don't personalize your search for you. And so it doesn't trap you in what they call the search bubble.
Right,
exactly. With Google knows what you like, and so it usually doesn't show you what you don't like, right? It doesn't not show it. It prioritizes the results it thinks you will like, and a lot of times that's helpful, but sometimes it's not.
Yeah, and you just don't know when it's helpful and when it's not.
And I think in one of their most stark examples, when you search for certain terms, the results, whether you get results back from Fox or MSNBC, will depend on your previous searches.
Interesting. Yeah, they have an example.
So Google kind of tries to figure out your politics,
right,
and decide what opinion you will agree with and give you that.
The other great thing about DuckDuckGo, other than it being totally private and all that stuff, is that it's open source too, and its backend is written on Perl, and it's hosted via NGINX, which we'll save because I know we're going to talk about that later today. So big win for Mint because Mint doesn't earn revenue in the traditional sense. They get donations from their users, and now they have this ad share with DuckDuckGo, and I think that fits. DuckDuckGo, partnering with DuckDuckGo fits perfectly in line with Mint. It's DuckDuckGo respects privacy, they respect their users, and I feel like Mint does that too. So I'm happy for them, and I hope they make some money on it because they've definitely earned it.
And that'll drive further development. And now that it's we've already seen that Mint is starting to top the popularity list, and so
yeah. I'll talk about
this.
That.
Can only help.
I got that. Boy, we got a packed show today because I got some more about that coming up on the show later today too. Links in the show notes if you guys want to check out all the features. But my advice would be stay tuned for the official action review here on the show next week. Now, I did tease that open source gaming got a huge shot in the arm this week, and I was not exaggerating. This is fantastic. Just as promised, Doom 3's source code has been released. And this is awesome. Just like Quake 3, the Doom 3 source code has been released to the public, minus a few things that they had to take out due to some patent issues. And there's details about that in the show notes. But now, you remember, what was it? With Quake 3, there was the IO Quake project, right?
Yep.
I think that's what they call the IO Quake or something like that.
Yep.
Well, now they've launched the IO Doom 3 project. The same folks responsible for the IO Quake 3 project are taking this on. Now, why this is a really kind of a I think, an important milestone in the release of this code is this infrastructure, this IO Quake 3, when they did it for IO Quake 3, was the infrastructure used for Open Arena, World of Patamon, Urban Terror, and a bunch of other open source games that we all know and love and talked about in the show. And, they're just getting started. The infrastructure is just being set up for IO Doom 3. And when it is all set up, you'll be able to find the project website over at iodoom3.org. But now we're going to have a whole new generation of open source games that will use this IO Doom 3 project to build upon.
And, Doom 3 is actually fairly modern compared to Quake 3.
Yeah. I mean, this is huge. This is really great. And even as the Quake 3 engine began to age, the open source games and the open source community made mods to it that really brought it a long ways. I mean, there are really great, like Nagios, right? Isn't Nagios based on the Quake 3 engine? So. Or if it's not, there's games just like it that are just as good that have gotten years of runway out of Quake 3. So, I mean, to have Doom 3 now is extremely...
Well, because especially, like, Quake 3 was kind of iconic at its time because it, as the engine itself, it was behind almost every commercial first-person shooter that came out in that time span.
Yeah, that was one of the first big game engines.
Medal of Honor, Call of Duty, all that stuff was it was one of the first times that a game engine got used in more than just the company's own games.
Yeah. I would love, somebody in the chat room just mentioned, and I don't know if this would be possible, but they're suggesting, could you take this and somehow tie it in with Blender and get a real-time 3D rendering engine into Blender somehow? I mean, it'd be interesting now that it's open source and you have other open source projects. I guess the point is you could see other things not even related to gaming take advantage of a fantastically powerful 3D rendering engine. It doesn't have to be for video games, but of course it will be used for video games. So that's really good. Now, something that doesn't help with your power savings when you're playing video games, but is better if you're not playing video games, is Linux kernel's power usage. It's been slashed after several updates. This article here is from PC World. I do want to give a plug to Phronix, though, because those guys have really been on top of this the entire time. PC World has kind of taken their work and sort of chopped it up and made it their own article from my appearance, or from my reading here. But PC World overall did do one of the better write-ups, so I wanted to also include their link. But so here's the details on this. Some of you maybe heard about this. We haven't talked a lot about this on the show, but if you recall, around Linux 2638, problems started to emerge that made the power usage of Linux go dramatically up, and especially on Sandy Bridge notebooks, you had some less than ideal power usage, but They noticed initially a jump of 9 watts on the average for power consumption. It would vary depending on the hardware. And
that doesn't seem like a lot, but on a notebook battery it is, right? We only have so many watt hours.
It's on average a 36% increase in power usage when you consider the impact that would make on battery life. And 9 watts was just the initial issue. Right. Subsequent updates actually made the issue worse. So it continued to get worse, but it looks like that issue has been solved. The heart of the problem was disabling a part of PCI Express active state power management. Some of you Windows 7 users might have seen this when you're in your power settings. You can manage the power link state control, and the motherboard can actually turn off PCI Express devices to save power. So even though your machine's on, it will turn off those devices. Well, of course, this over the years has maybe been sort of abused or molded to support Windows a little better, because either Windows isn't doing it right because there was a hardware bug, or the hardware manufacturers changed something because of a Windows bug. It's not quite clear. So Linux had to kind of adapt and accommodate for that. But when they kind of adopted the way Windows does it, and now it seems like the power usage has jumped way down. It's only a 60-line patch created by a Red Hat engineer, Matthew Garrett, who we've talked about before on the show. And there you go. So that's great news for portable Linux users. They don't have it in a shipping kernel yet. They're working hard.
But we can expect to see it soon.
They're working hard to get it in a kernel that will ship with the next round of distros. Especially, they say here in the article, they made special mention of Ubuntu 12.04 for the long-term support. They wanted to make sure that they got that power bug in there. So hopefully by the next time we all update, we'll get that. Now, the last story on the news docket for this week is the littlest big distro in the world, or the biggest little distro in the world. You guys remember Pinguy or Pinguy, I don't know, OS. We covered it a while ago on last. It was a good distro, packed full of goodies, preloaded to the gills with like Dropbox and multimedia programs and all kinds of stuff. Basically all the stuff I end up installing anyways, they just loaded for you. out of the box. But one of the pieces of feedback we got, Alan, from that review was, I don't want my distro full of all that stuff. I don't want all that crap in there. And so the guys over at Pinguy have sort of responded to that. They've released Pinguy OS Mini 11.10. And the mini part signifies a more reduced down version of the OS. But they've kept a lot of what people like the 2 conky bars and the menu and the applets that give you all the cool stats about your computer. Of course, it's based on the new Ubuntu, so there's that too. But here's what I liked about it a lot, is it uses a new piece of, I don't know if it's new, but you don't see a lot of distros shipping with it, a new project called ZRAM. And ZRAM lets you use a compressed swap file inside a RAM disk. So you don't use a ton of RAM because it's compressed, but you get the advantage of storing part of your most frequently used part of your swap in RAM. So that could be a nice little performance boost. You look like you disagree.
That seems weird.
Yeah. It does mean carving out part of your RAM.
Yeah, it's like using a RAM disk to store your swap file defeats the entire point.
Well, I guess that's true.
The swap file is for stuff that won't fit in your RAM.
But for example, if you have the machine you're Skyped in on right now has 12 gigs of RAM in it, and the machine still uses the swap file. Because as programs just idle out, it removes them from memory and stores them in swap. So I don't know, maybe if you're one of those dudes who leaves all of your apps running all the time, you're right, it might be a little gimmicky.
It depends. I guess it depends on the memory management system. In BSD, whether it should aggressively swap things out or not is a sysctl that you can turn on or off.
Yeah.
So you can say, don't swap out stuff unless there's memory pressure, or swap out stuff preemptively because I know there's going to be memory pressure later.
Well, you can even run a distro of Linux without a swap partition. So
that's a bad idea because if you do run out of RAM, the system will halt. And that's bad.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it's kind of curious. Maybe some people out there have more information about ZRAM.
It may actually be useful.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I like the approach of trying little things. They also included a tool called boot repair, which is hey, you know what? If you accidentally mess up your bootloader or an update, screws the pooch, we've got a tool. You can boot into a live CD and get going again, and then use the boot repair and fix your loader, which is nice because I know that sometimes bites new users in the butt, especially as you start experimenting and playing with stuff. So they just kind of take care of that for you. Yeah. So links to all of that in the show notes. All right, Alan. Well, that's all the news for this week. All right, everyone, get your big hugging jacket on because we're going to give open source projects a giant hug this week. The projects that we've been standing on the shoulders of to make our lives easier, maybe our careers possible. We've ran down the list. It is the second annual Linux Action Show Thanksgiving special. I know not all of you celebrate Thanksgiving out there, but we can all be thankful for these open source projects. Now, we've all made a list. Randall's joined us. Randall, you might remember from our Fedora 16 review. Now, Randall, he works over at Coca-Cola, and he manages 200 plus Linux servers, all Red Hat boxes, right, Randall?
That is correct.
So I'm glad to have you on here because you fit right in with Alan and I. I'm sure we'll have some great picks this week. I'll start, though, because I am hosting, so I get to pick mine. And my pick, some of you might be not too surprised by it, but it is Linux Mint. I am a major Linux Mint fanboy, and the old legend goes that the original creator of Linux Mint was inspired by the Linux Action Show and the comments we made about different distributions to go off and make a distribution that not only he would like, but that we would also like too. I don't know if that's true. In fact, if you're out there and want to contact me and come on the show, we should talk because that would be awesome. But even if I've had the smallest bit of responsibility for Linux Mint or no responsibility at all, it's still an amazing Linux desktop, one that for a period of time I felt like I was floating in a world where there would be no distribution that would be right for me and that I would always sort of have to make something work for me. And Linux Mint came along and was like, this is a distro where we really think about what a desktop experience is like, and we like GNOME too. And here it is, and it's awesome. And Mint has just grown from there and has become an amazing desktop project. I mean, I think we've all been talking about this for a little while now, but I think most of us are aware that Linux Mint has slowly climbed its way to the top of the Linux popularity charts and now dominates DistroWatch on top of Ubuntu. It's an amazing distribution that it itself stands on the shoulders of giants, and I had to make it my first pick. It's sort of my most meta pick, I think, but I had to give them a shout out. So I love Linux Mint, and I would recommend that everybody maybe burn that ISO to a DVD and then stuff some stockings when you go to families for the holidays.
Or you can put it on a USB.
Good point. All right, Alan, let's go with you. What's one of your open source projects you're absolutely thankful for?
I think the biggest one is Nginx. It's a BSD licensed web server, but specifically it's very light and powerful, and it's designed to handle the C10K problem, which is I need my web server to be able to handle 10,000 concurrent visitors. And that's just something like a web server like Apache just can't do. And
Jupyter Broadcasting runs on it's NGINX, right?
Yeah, it's meant Nginx. That's just the way they spell it. It's Russian, so that you can excuse the
very plain website. I'm not even showing the website because it's just so basic. It's so
the way it looks like it's out of like 1998. But part of that is Nginx by itself only serves static files like HTML. Now it has support for fast CGI to do things like Perl or regular CGI or PHP or Ruby and whatever you want to do.
Jupyter Broadcasting obviously uses a ton of PHP, and we run this service, so.
Right. But it just passes that off to a separate processor that does it, which has advantages as well. But
yeah, sure.
Yeah, so it's just a very small, very powerful web server, and it's also a built-in reverse proxy load balancer with a cache. So it's very powerful, and basically Scale Engine would not be possible without Nginx. So.
And that's huge for you and your business. Yeah. Now, Randall, have you messed with Nginx much?
Yeah, actually, with talking to Alan about it, actually converted some of our web servers to Nginx to serve most of the media files and things. We still use Apache for, the basic HTML and PHP, but most of the stuff I'm starting to convert to is to deliver the media content to the web crowd.
How's that gone?
It's actually pretty good. If we've seen increased performance in our servers and our bandwidth, 50 to 60%, and then you'd be surprised. That's a huge jump from just switching from don't get me wrong, love Apache, but Nginx is definitely designed to handle the media so much better.
You can't deny that's a huge performance jump. I mean, that really is significant. Alan, what's its secret for being so damn fast?
A small number of threads that are all event-driven instead of having pre-forked workers or even just threads for each connection. It basically has a number of threads you specify. Usually you would do 1 or 1.5 per CPU core that you have. And then they're just event-driven, and they just do the work.
Oh, nice.
And then it can also take advantage of operating system optimizations like send file. So when you need to send like a 1 gigabyte video file over HTTP, the web server doesn't have to read that data in from the disk and write it out to the socket. It can pass it off to the kernel, which will just flood the socket with the file.
Oh, that's huge. So
that lowers the context switches.
Yeah.
And again, that takes it out of the process. Whereas in Apache, you'd have a separate thread or an entirely separate process doing that work. And so you'd have hundreds of those running at once, and they'd all be contending for the CPU. But with Nginx, you only have like one per CPU, and so you don't have this contention over the CPU as well.
Yeah. Now, Randall, why don't we'll stick with you? What is one of your favorite open source projects?
Personally, one of my favorite is Wine. I love Wine. It's come a long way since when it first started.
Oh yeah.
You can run anything from like Notepad to like Skyrim, which I use to play gaming on.
It's working for Skyrim. No kidding.
Yeah, it works very well. I mean, you can hardly tell the difference. There are a few little things that Wine can't do, that Windows can't. But pretty much, like the graphics-wise, it's pretty on par.
Now, Wine for me has been huge, just keeping me on Linux. Because a Stowe and just tons of games over the years. But not just games either. I shouldn't downplay it. It's all kinds of Windows apps.
Oh yeah, like Photoshop. A lot of people have been using Photoshop because they already have a copy for Windows, and they don't want to they want to download or buy a new copy. So what they do is just use Wine to run it. And a lot of people misunderstand that. People think Wine is an emulator, but that's far from the case, because
that's actually what Wine stands for. Wine is not an emulator. Wine is not an emulator.
And what it does is it basically allows Linux to access, Windows API calls. So it's pretty close.
It's just a translator.
Exactly. And there's not much for it to do. So the programs run as close as native as you can imagine. I've hardly seen anything. There's a few applications that, won't work correctly. And it's not, and they work on it. And they usually have a patch out like in a couple of weeks. It's a very popular application. Like Skyrim, it was like the day they came out, they had a patch and it was like ready to go.
That's awesome.
Right, because before when it was less popular, the problem it would have would be that it would only work for apps that were mature on the Wine platform.
Yeah.
But now they've gotten to the point where things pretty much work out of the box with a few hitches, and then they get on top of those really quick.
Exactly.
For me, Wine, if it wasn't for Wine, I don't think I would have been able to make the early transition that I did make to the Linux desktop, because I was able to, before Evolution was even around and supporting Exchange, I was able to use Outlook in an Exchange environment so I could run Linux. And that just alone sort of was like the domino piece that made me switch all of my machines over to Linux. Once I knew I could do it in my corporate environment, then moving my home environment over was a snap. And it was just, Wine was definitely one of the personal key puzzle pieces for me adopting desktop Linux.
Well, because especially back then, virtualization wasn't an option. Like trying to run Windows in a VM on top of Linux for the couple of apps you needed it for.
Dog slow.
It was impossible before hardware virtualization and the newer technology that we have.
Yep. And it's still not really there for gaming. So
No,
that's,
not at all.
Now, I'll pick one of mine because I think this next pick really kicked things off and brought all distributions to the next level. They might not have used its exact technology, but the idea behind Knoppix, the first, at least in my estimation, what I observed, the first real Linux live CD that, to this day, still has some damn impressive features, really, I think, made all of the other distro authors wake up and say, wait a minute, we could do this too. And it was really, until Knoppix, all Linux distributions, all the major ones, shipped with a standard installer that you booted to and went right into install mode. There was no live CD to check things out. You had to go get specific distros to do live CDs. Not all of them did them. And Knoppix came along, and I really think they changed all that, and they're still around, still making an awesome distro.
Yep, I've used Knoppix for the city here had an old server that was QNX, which ran some system for like garbage collection or whatever. And the hardware died, but they couldn't just run the hard drive in a regular machine because it was specific to this QNX hardware. But they wanted the data back from the database files, which were old like DBase files. So booted off Knoppix, because Knoppix was the only thing I could find that supported this QNX file system, because it's their own unique file system that I don't know exactly what it is, but it's some kind of hybrid between like FAT32 and ext2. And it makes absolutely no sense. What a
beast.
Yeah, but it's an operating system. I couldn't find anything else that would support this. And this Knoppix CD, I downloaded it, pop in the machine, and I got the files. I started an SSH server, log into it, copy the files over, including the password file. And then, because actually QNX used a reversible encryption for the passwords, so I was actually able to crack all the passwords for them as well.
That's clever. I know we've all probably have a few live CD stories to save the day. Randall, is there anything jump into your mind that...
I was... I think with the first version of Knoppix, I was going for my my bachelor's, and I think I was... a lot of people, their computers are failing, like Windows at times, like I can't get my stuff. And then I actually made like, $300 or $400 from saving people's, like essays and midterm.
Knoppix went into the tool bag for sure. Like Knoppix was one of the disks you brought on a call because it was absolutely vital if the machine couldn't boot. Exactly. Still is. Now I use things like System Rescue CD, which is awesome. But
but no, back then, even now, I still use Knoppix from time to time. It's I would say it's definitely a good tool to have in your tool bag.
Yeah, it's still one of the best live CDs out there. All right, well, let's move on. One of Alan's list here. Alan, you picked Varnish. Something tells me this is probably something to do with system administration.
Well, Varnish is also a web server, but it's not a web server. It's a reverse proxy.
Right.
That's a cache. So we use this at Scale Engine as well, and it actually sits in front of part of Jupyter Broadcasting. So all the images and CSS and JavaScript files and all the other static files that are on the Jupyter Broadcasting site are actually offloaded to a subdomain that runs Varnish. And Varnish basically keeps all those objects in RAM instead of on disk.
Oh,
so
boy.
When you connect to them, and it delivers them like instantaneously.
Here, I'll reload. I've cleared my cache here on my web browser for watching the video version. I'll reload the Jupyter Broadcasting page. And just, watch how fast it just snaps. Everything just snaps together at once. Everything is rendered at once, and it loads immediately.
Yeah. So basically, Varnish is a reverse proxy, and basically, out of the box, you can put it in front of your regular web server, and it will auto-learn everything it needs to know. Like, it looks at the headers, and it knows, hey, this page was loaded with a cookie, so that means that it can't be cached. Right?
Oh, that is so sweet.
And so, so the first time you access a picture and it's not in the Varnish cache, it will actually connect to your website and download the picture. But then it keeps it in its memory and serves it from there.
Yeah,
and you set how much memory to give it, and then it has least recently used cache. So when it runs out of memory, it takes the thing that was accessed the longest time ago, deletes that to make room for the next thing.
That's awesome. And the sort of side benefit that's really, business impacting in the long run is, I don't know about other search engines, but Google, when they evaluate your website for its search ranking eligibility, they actually check to see if things like your CSS and your JavaScript and your images are loading from a separate domain, a separate server.
Yep. And just the overall speed of your site.
They estimate that is going to mean a faster site. And so they actually give you, like a +1 in their database if you have those things. And so, it just helps. It's funny. It sounds funny, but it even helps with SEO. Like you wouldn't think, but
because it also helps with the C10K problem, because if you have to run Apache because your application doesn't want to be moved over or whatever, or even just your administrators can't handle switching to Nginx, Varnish takes away most of the load on your site, right? Like, if your Apache server can only handle 100 people at once, not loading all the images from Apache every time somebody goes to the website means those 100 threads can be serving pages instead.
Well, and the other thing, and I think you do this, is you can take the Varnish cache and you can distribute it along the edge of your CDN, so that way people are hitting those things the closest geographically to them. So, if, for example, if the server is in Canada, but somebody is over in England accessing the web server, they don't go to Canada to get that image. They stay on their continent. And so performance is much better for them too.
Yep.
Now, that's just specific to your setup. Not everyone would use Varnish like that, but Scale Engine does.
Varnish was originally developed for a newspaper website.
Oh, no kidding.
In Denmark, I think. I forget which country. And the idea was that they would sit it in front of the newspaper site, and it would do the images, but the newspaper articles could also be cached, right? The whole web page.
Yeah.
But if you were logged in, then it had to do this customization thing, right?
Right.
And so they came up with this technology called edge side includes, it's a standard, but they implemented it. With edge side includes, what you do is you render the page with the news article normally, but on that widget on the side that's supposed to have like the weather, you actually have a bit of XML that references a separate file. So the news article is cached, but the reference to the weather is a separate file which will have the cookie. So when you're logged in, everybody gets the same static news article, but gets the different weather article.
That's cool.
But it comes back as one page.
Yeah.
So they can reduce the load while keeping the customization.
That is slick. And like you said, it does help when you have a bunch of traffic. We at Jupiter Broadcasting were just choking with Apache. It really was becoming a scale issue for us.
With your Apache and your SQL, and you had a whole dedicated server too. It wasn't just like, your regular hosting.
No.
And it wasn't doable.
It was a good server. And all right. So We'll move on because there's plenty more on the list. Let's talk about one of Randall's. Randall, you picked OpenSSH, obviously a great one. Why don't you share some thoughts on it?
Well, if you can see in my docket, I was saying this project is too awesome for words.
I mean, OpenSSH is beyond just a remote administration tool. It's beyond a great file transfer utility. I mean, it is one of the best...
Sorry. You could pretty much do anything with OpenSSH.
Yep.
I'm sure you must use it extensively for server management.
Oh, yeah. Right. But I actually use that more often to use it as a... I don't use VPN. Like, we have our own VPN set for our salespeople and whatever, but I use SSH to do everything through because...
Well, you were about to say, I mean, you were touching on the VPN thing. You use SSH to replace the need of a VPN. How do you do that?
I just forward everything I need to through there. Like, you have X... You can forward through X easily, no problem. And, most of our web interfaces and everything go through, X through Windows, through, X Windows to whatever.
The X11 forwarding feature is great. I was telling Alan, I think on the live stream the other day that I use it. I SSH into a remote server, and I prefer to manage VirtualBox with the GUI. So I use SSH forwarding, X11 forwarding, to just bring up the VirtualBox GUI rendered on my local terminal, but running from the remote box over in Texas over the internet. So,
yeah. You can do a lot of things like that. And also you can if you forward everything else through that, making a tunnel, you can actually, VNC into another box, or you can actually use, Windows desktop. You can use Putty to use, forward stuff through the Windows box. So you can actually use remote desktop or everything. OpenSSH is so versatile that you can pretty much do anything you want with it.
A friend of mine uses that Putty client to tunnel out from behind the firewall at work because he couldn't actually connect to a VPN.
Who you want to cover? This is one of your favorites, Putty.
Yeah. So Putty is the SSH client. Now, it's not just for Windows, actually. There is a version that will run on BSD and Linux.
It's kind of ugly, though.
Well, no, it looks exactly the same as it does on Windows.
Oh, I thought it was all TK looking, like it looked sort of fugly. I haven't used it for a long time. So. Okay.
The reason I like it is because I have all my saved profiles in there.
Yes.
And I literally have 40 plus servers I have to manage, and they all have names and they're all sorted in there. And I just double click and it pops up, and it has window titles and they have different settings because my BSD machines versus the Linux machines, some of the settings about like what the home key does they have to be set differently.
Yep.
And I like to have a really long scroll back buffer and things like that.
Awesemo2000 in the chat room just points out that I probably find it ugly because Windows itself can be kind of fugly. I find Putty to be like a glass of ice water for a Linux user that's stuck in Windows hell. Like, because you can, it is one of the greatest utilities to work on a remote Linux system.
Yep.
And so Putty, I got to give it a mention. Now,
but yes, with OpenSSH, you can actually use it on Windows to tunnel. And so my friend, when he's at work, he can't actually make a VPN connection out because that's a protocol that's not allowed through their firewall.
They block it, yeah.
But he can use OpenSSH or Putty plus OpenSSH to actually hit one of my servers and get out from behind the firewall at work.
That's awesome. I used to use FreeNX, which rides on top of OpenSSH and X1140 to remote into a box to get past a bunch of filters when I worked for the school district. Speaking of the school district, I'll pick one of my favorite open source projects, and that is the Samba project. This project is probably responsible almost single-handedly for me busting open a very, very traditional financial institution into adopting open source technology and Linux. Samba saved the day. We had an NT4 file server that I should back up. This bank used a bunch of terminal services. We had 108 or so, 109 terminal servers, NT4, and they would all connect into the single file server. And they called me and they said, our file server is locking up all the time. Users can't open documents. It takes 10 minutes. What's going on? We tried to adjust the NT4 file server to make it work better. And I sat back and I said, well, I've been working on this thing called Samba. And I think I figured out how to use this new software. Now, at this time, it was still in alpha, but they have this new software that you work with. It's called WinBind, and it's not very reliable yet. In fact, it crashes so often that I had to keep it running at the command line and with a -D just right there so I could see when it crashed. But it lets you connect to an NT4 domain and use the NT user accounts as local Linux accounts. And I think with that, I could plug the Samba box in here and make it your file server and get rid of that NT4 box. I'm like, well, okay, we're desperate. We'll try it. And, it didn't just work. It worked. It continued to scale with that company that went from something like 19 to 20 branches. In 2 years, they went to 42 branches. They doubled capacity, and that one Linux file server scaled. And then we eventually built in redundancy and things like that. But the Samba project was like this moment where I realized file services and file sharing and general server services can be so much better than what Windows offers. Like, when I realized in the smb.conf file that I could say exclude.vbs files, exclude.mp3, exclude.mov, and they would just never get written to the file server, that was huge for us. That was, that cut down on shared viruses, that cut down on people using their home directories to share movie files, and we had limited space back in the day. Samba to me was like this, wait a minute, somebody can do what Microsoft's doing and do it way better. And that was big. That really opened up my eyes as far as Linux adoption. So huge props to the Samba project. And I think we all continue to use it in small ways all the time. Yep. It's still a great piece of software. So, all right. So that's my pick. Alan, why don't we throw in your next one, PHP?
Yes. Basically, the other thing that, again, it's a BSD licensed project, and it's basically the web programming language that makes things like WordPress possible. But basically all of Scale Engine is about using Nginx, Varnish, PHP, and MySQL to build websites.
Yeah, these technologies literally help you build a career. right?
Yeah.
I mean,
basically, on top of just my business, basically, I've made an entire career out of being good at these open source projects.
right. I know exactly what you mean. It is kind of a symbiotic relationship. If they didn't exist, you wouldn't be working on them. Because they do exist, you were able to specialize in them and then become, you have an in-demand skill set.
Right, and then using my skill set, when I get hired to do something, I use these projects, which makes them more popular, which makes my skill sets worth more.
Yeah.
And it just keeps going and going.
Now, Randall has one in here that I think is really good because there's been a lot of negative talk, a lot of people that are upset about GNOME and GNOME 3, and Randall put GNOME on his list of projects that he's thankful for, and I agree, Randall. What do you think? What are you thinking here?
Well, GNOME came a long way. I remember back in the day, 2 and Red Hat version 2 and 3, that they actually they were developing. They incorporated Enlightenment, some of the tool sets for Enlightenment and stuff.
Yes,
but it's come such a long way. It is the most stable piece of window managing software out there. That's the reason why they use it on servers. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love KDE and all, but for a server environment, GNOME is definitely, if you're going to use a GUI, definitely GNOME has been stable. It's been shown that way. I've never, ever had a problem.
How do you feel about GNOME 3?
GNOME 3, it's getting there. It's still stable. It took a while, they took it away. It's just something new that people are going to get to. But I can understand, and if they do it right, they can implement a lot of the tools with GNOME 3, and it'd actually be pretty impressive with some of the stuff they can.
I could see that. I was reflecting on the whole GNOME situation this week. I put this question out on Google+, and I'll include a link in the show notes for the Google+ thread. People put a bunch of great suggestions in there. But a couple of people suggested GNOME, and I started thinking back over the history of GNOME. I mean, do you remember when Nautilus was created by Easel? Remember the company Easel made Nautilus, and they were going to do this whole cloud hosting with Nautilus, and that's how they're going to make their money. But it didn't work out, and they closed up shop, and they donated the Nautilus file browser to the GNOME project, and so I guess my point is there was a time when GNOME didn't even have a decent file manager. So it goes through these it goes through these phases where it leaps, and then it sort of rebuilds and adds things back in, and then it leaps again. And this is literally that third leap that we're seeing. And it's just not there for me yet, but I'm now of the opinion that it's getting there. It will be there. Mm-hmm. So I agree with you, Randall. Great pick. The GNOME project has been one of my go-to desktops now for forever.
It's been one of the first open source projects that went along around the time of Linux developing. So it's been there pretty much from the beginning. And you can tell through the years that it's definitely polished a lot of its stuff.
Yeah. Now, my next pick, I think I have one more server type pick. So if you guys are getting tired of server picks, I've got some desktop picks too. But this last one, because remember, this is all about the ones I'm thankful for. I stood on the shoulders of giants. The one thing I got in before I got a Samba box, the reason why I started experimenting with the Samba box is I had tried Mandriva's first enterprise distribution that they ever made. And one of the things that you could do in there is pretty easily set up a Squid proxy server. The Squid cache showed me how I could take a free piece of open source software and an open source operating system and reuse the server hardware that they were literally going to throw away, put it between the users and their internet connection, and save 40% of their bandwidth. They only had, back in the day, remember, bandwidth was nothing. Bandwidth was so small. This company that I was working for only had a 1.5 megabit line. And when you have 700 users using the internet, 1.5 megabits doesn't go very far, right?
Nope.
So putting Squid in and watching, and then the great part was this Mandriva distribution generated these amazing charts back in the day. And I said, here was our bandwidth usage from the ISP's report last month. Here's our bandwidth usage this month. And then here's the Squid report. You can see how much bandwidth we saved. And I did all of that without spending a single dollar other than my own time. And that was like this huge click for me that, wait a minute, this is a massive value add that I can add to my clients and save them a ton of money. And then that's why I started experimenting with Samba, because I was like, well, I'm going to try, if this works so well, maybe this will work really well. And it was those early discoveries years and years and years ago, when these projects were brand new, that seriously set me up for a career worth of Linux tinkering, and then eventually which led to the Linux Action Show, which, was eventually led to Linux Mint. No. So I love Squid Cache. I want to give a plug for it. It's maybe not it's not always the right cache anymore for every situation. There wasn't a lot back then, but it's still a great project.
for client-side cache, it's still the best. But before Varnish, it was basically your only option as a cache to sit in front of your web server as a reverse cache.
Yes.
Now it's not the right solution for that, but for a while it was.
Well,
The
especially
only
if you have
solution.
an internet, you can actually use, like, if you really want to dabble into some pretty nifty stuff, it's like you can actually use a Squid to scan for viruses, like incoming traffic.
Yes.
So, like, if you have like a big company, you want to stop it, exactly at the source before it gets into, because people, there's going to be a virus, they're going to get it. Squid can actually scan through all the traffic that's coming in without hardly noticeably any bandwidth like drops. And it scans file. Oh, if it's wrong, it stops it right there.
Yeah, well, it does it all. It does it all in memory, so it's not like it has to write it to disk to do it. Now, when it caches, it writes to disk, but it actually stores some of that in memory too. You're right, Randall. That, in fact, later on, I tied in. I must have been Clam AV with Squid, and that's hot stuff. Good.
Yeah,
good,
well, that's actually in our Unix security class that I used to teach at the college. That was one of the capstone project was protecting an intranet using Squid to block Facebook.
Hey, that means I would have passed your class.
I block everything at work. They call me the Gestapo because I like Facebook, MySpace.
You're one of those guys, huh?
Yeah.
Alan, why don't we go to one of your picks, one that I love too, Nagios.
Yes, Nagios. I actually just set up a fresh Nagios server the other day. And so Nagios is, we've talked a bit about it before on TechSnap, but it's a network monitoring and alerting system.
A very nice one.
Yeah, so it goes out and it has a bunch of different plugins, and it connects to my different services and servers and monitors them. Mm-hmm. So it checks, how much CPU is in use on each of my servers, how much free RAM is there, how much of the swap file is used, and is the server is it pingable? Is the ping under so many milliseconds? Is the packet loss is it 0? Because if it's not 0, that's bad, and things like that.
Now, the graphing that it does, does it use Cactus to...
The built-in doesn't provide any graphing.
Okay.
But you can connect it to different things. I use Nagios Graph.
Okay.
But you can also connect it to Cacti, or there's like 8 other options.
Cacti.
Yeah, the great thing about
is what I've used before. That's what it was. Now, Randall, you guys use any kind of monitoring down there at Coca-Cola for this kind of thing? Does Nagios happen to be it?
Yep, that happens exactly to be it.
Wow. So Coca-Cola is a really big open source shop, isn't it?
Well, there's a lot of there's a lot of open source, but there's a lot of Windows stuff that we have to deal with. But we try to integrate them.
Yeah, I remember the first time I was ever exposed to a monitoring and alerting system was there when I worked at the power plant. There was this Windows machine that sat in the corner with a pair of speakers, and then depending on what server went down,
was it What's Up Gold?
Yes.
Yes, that's the first one. Same thing, dude. I walked into a place and they're using What's Up Gold with speakers plugged into a PC, like a Windows 98 box or something.
Yeah. And, this was about that time.
Yeah.
And it had different wave files it would play depending what server was down.
Awesome. Well, hey, they were, the guys that I watched were proud of it too. They're like, yeah, check out our monitoring thing. This thing is great. And then later on when we wanted to deploy it in Nagios, they were like, oh, well, have you checked out What's Up Gold? I'm like, are you guys serious?
Well,
I mean, What's Up Gold's fine.
Actually, Nagios has the ability to play sound files when something goes down if you leave the web interface open.
Well, there's a key feature.
Yeah.
Now, Randall, you've picked SDL. We're getting close to the end of the list here, but you picked SDL. You want to tell us about that?
Well, yeah.
Simple
SDL is
direct media layer.
Yeah, it was the OpenGL's need to compete with DirectX. It allows you to access underlying hardware like DirectX does. Mm-hmm. And combined with OpenGL, you can have like a lot of audio applications or games that require, like OpenGL needs direct hardware access. That SDL was opened that doors up to allow OpenGL to progress further and actually compete with DirectX.
And what's great is it also supports Windows itself, so it's not
exactly.
Yep. So game developers could use SDL, and then they get all of those platforms: Windows, Mac, and Linux.
Because I remember QEMU, the one of the first or one of the open source emulators for virtualization, uses SDL on Windows and Linux to actually draw its window.
Oh, yeah. There you go.
What's great, though, is that before, game programmers, when they used OpenGL, they had to actually use some DirectX calls before, because they had to use both. Even though they were using OpenGL, they still had to use a little bit of DirectX to make the calls to draw a window or something. But now with SDL, they can actually do it cross-platform and not and change very little code. That's why you see a lot of the games now. It's pretty much easy to port one game to another. They use OpenGL because it's with SDL now. They can just pretty much just change a little bit, push it out.
That's great. That's great. All right, I'll make one of my picks now. And now I'm going to talk about a desktop app that has been my right-hand man when it comes to editing and trying to do different things and working with formats that people send me. It's been the go-to tool for years now, and it continues to be that, and that's VLC Media Player. Just an awesome open-source media player, of course, cross-platform. Throws just about every damn thing you can find at it. It'll play it just fine, and they continue to add more stuff. Even really strange one-off codecs, well, not one-off, but codecs like that people never need out in the real world, like ProRes. That's just something that editors use that is like, got to be 2% of their audience needs that. And now, of course, FFmpeg adds that, so they've added to VLC. Now, Alan, I know FFmpeg is one of your picks. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so FFmpeg is the original project, and it builds libav codec, which is actually what powers VLC. And so that's the part of libav codec is the universal open source codec that allows VLC to play pretty much anything.
Yes.
But what we use FFmpeg on the server for is to actually convert files. So we'd take in FLVs or MP4s or whatever and output a standard H.264 file that we can stream. But we can also use it for other things. We do for stream capturing and recording and a bunch of other things. The one that it saved us the biggest on was actually we had some IP security cameras that we wanted to be able to stream. And they provided only a motion JPEG view. And so we actually used FFmpeg to convert that and then broadcast it as RTSP into our media server so that people could watch it on their iPhone.
Archive.org, a massive online resource. All the media they take in when they crawl the web or that you upload, in the background, they use FFmpeg to convert that to OGG-Theor and all the other various formats.
I don't think they admit it, but I'm pretty sure that's what YouTube uses as well.
Oh, I bet. I bet. They must, right? Because scriptable. What were you going to say, Randall?
I do a lot of programming, and I do a lot of scripting, too. I have to say, one of the things I really admire about FFmpeg is the most optimized piece of software I've ever run into. I mean, I'm really impressed with it. I mean, because it's open source, you can go look through the code, and I'm like, some really impressive work here.
Yes. FFmpeg combined with X264 is amazing. You can encode across an 8-core machine, all lit up, faster than real time. I mean, it comes out clean, and it's such a good tool. I completely agree.
Yep, and the crazy thing is that one of the original developers of that and the guy that pretty much single-handedly wrote the first versions of QEMU is the same guy.
What a dude.
Yeah, it's like Fabrice Bellard. He's also won a bunch of programming contests and also wrote the algorithm to calculate the nth digit of pi that's still the fastest.
Exactly. Wow. And I think FFmpeg is the first one to actually use multi-core and multi-thread.
Yes, it was definitely the first solution for encoding across multiple cores.
Exactly.
Which, when you have 8, is like a waste if you're not using them all.
And I guess, and I won't get into it because I want to keep us moving here, but I guess the math behind taking a continuous framed video file and splitting it against multiple cores is some of the most advanced stuff that the code has to do do that right. Like, it does some amazing trickery to do it, and if I understood the details, I'm sure I'd be blowing all of you away with it. But let's jump to one of Randall's picks, and that is one of my favorites as well, Virtualbox. Randall, come on now. Everybody loves Virtualbox, but tell us what you love about it.
Well, I use Virtualbox a lot, and what the great thing is about it is open source. You actually see how stuff is written. But what I love about it is I can create a virtual environment. Like, I could create a lab. So I can test different softwares with different servers. I can try Linux. Will this work well with serving Windows documents, or do I need to change things? I can put all that in one box, and it's so well optimized. I can run 4 or 5 different virtual machines on a laptop to test this out. But yeah, that's pretty much what it's a great way. They actually, I think one of the first to actually offer 3D.
3D. Especially for Linux.
Yeah, they support Linux. I think it was first Linux for 3D rendering, or calls for OpenGL, so that you can view 3D.
So now, have you been using VirtualBox for a long time, or were you a VMware person that then switched to VirtualBox? That's what I did.
I'm also a VMware because we have tons, but I love VirtualBox. Like I said, to be honest, their tools and what you can do with it surpasses VMware in some applications because you can create. It's so easy to create like a virtual switch, a virtual network, and you can test it, and you don't have to have it, go outside, or you can like have it so that you can have one NIC that goes out and everything channels through that. It is so you can do so much with it. When they developed this, it was like, hey, I can test my lab on my laptop.
Yeah, like I love the whole virtual switch aspect where you can have a private switch where what you do on there doesn't leak out to the network. I've actually done Active Directory domain. This is way back in the day, but I did Active Directory domain migrations inside of VirtualBox to make sure it worked well, and then was able to take that and then replicate that on the production network.
Yeah, we did the same at the college. They switched from VMware Server to VirtualBox just to standardize things, and because the VMware Server interface isn't really designed for running on the desktop, right? It's meant to run on a big server, and then you run the clients on the desktop, and so it was kind of hard on the machines. And so they switched everything over to VirtualBox, and it made possible what we would do for the Linux class to do that Squid routing thing that we talked about.
Yeah,
we
do it in VirtualBox.
You'd create the router as a virtual machine with two NICs, one bridge to the actual network interface, and then one on a private switch. And then you would create a second VM as your client that would only be on the private switch. And so you had to build an actual router that worked and set up the Squid proxy.
I kind of did that for the TextNet PFSense episode we did. I built a sort of mini network to test PFSense for the show.
And well, the way that we had to do that before VirtualBox in the lab was each row of computers was connected to a server at the back of the room. There was one for each row, and it had the two NICs. And so we had to use physical machines to allow, and there was a punch-down block where you would flip the cables between flat, and which everybody connected to the switch, or what we called the bridge mode, where you'd have to connect to through these different servers at the back. And so we managed to recapture those machines and turn them back into usable class machines because we were able to virtualize it. And this way, instead of having to work as a group on the router, everybody got to do it themselves. Yeah. And so it meant that the students got more value out of the class.
Yeah, that is really sweet. I've also been fortunate enough to admin a very small MMO for over a year, and the entire MMO runs inside a series of VirtualBox machines, like the server components, the database components, and all these different components are all for various virtual machines, and you could literally pick up the virtual infrastructure and move it to their physical hardware, and the whole MMO, the entire MMO world moves with it.
Right, and that allows them to scale, right?
Yes. Why don't we let's pick up the pace so we get to all of them here. I'll mention mine really quick. Obviously, WordPress.org. Jupiter Broadcasting has ran on WordPress.org since its inception, and it has had its disadvantages, but it's come so far, and it does so much now that I can't imagine using another CMS to do what we do now. And WordPress has gotten to the point now where you can get a WordPress blog set up in like 5 minutes.
Okay.
So I'm a huge fan of WordPress, and I want to give it mad props. Jupiter Broadcasting just absolutely relies on that like nothing else. Alan, do you want to bang out two? I see you've got Tortoise.
Yes, mostly just WebKit and Chromium, which are the BSD licensed browser engine and the actual browser.
WebKit, huh? Yeah, that's an Apple project, but boy, man, hasn't that been extremely useful for the entire internet? Thank you.
Because the KDE browser is based on it now too, isn't it?
Well, that's kind of how it started. KHTML, right. I believe WebKit was a fork of KHTML. Right. And then WebKit took off across every mobile platform out there. Even the Windows Phone operating system uses WebKit. Yep. And, of course, Chromium. And there's a whole bunch of Linux browsers that use WebKit. And so...
Yeah, and it's BSD licensed, so you can if you wanted to, you could develop a proprietary browser with it.
Now, Randall, you had Samba on here. We covered that one, but I completely agree with you. Now, do you guys at Coca-Cola use Samba for file services and things like that, or you guys use Windows servers for that?
No, we use Active Directory right now. We use a lot. But the great thing about Samba is you can incorporate it into a Active Directory domain. You can have users and permissions and all that stuff through the Windows environment. We use that a lot. I've been testing Samba 4 too a lot. I'm really, really, really impressed with Samba 4.
Really? It's coming along good? See, I have not played with it much.
What's cool though is that the web interface is the things you can do with web interfaces nowadays. You can import everything from an Active Directory controller, like take over its role and everything just through the web interface. You're like, okay, here's the IP address
sweet.
of the Windows server, and you type it in, it copies everything, it takes over. Because before, right now, it only supports Active Directory. Samba 4 actually becomes an Active Directory. So you can actually run a whole Windows server through Samba 4, and you won't even need anything from Windows at all.
That is nice. That is nice. All right. Well, I've got 2 last picks I think I'll wrap us with, so then we could go here. And, of course, leave comments, you guys, and tell us yours. And I want to read through all of them, so I encourage you to do that. But wouldn't be sitting here without this guy. And so I want to say thanks to Mr. Linus Torvalds, and thanks for joining Google+. To me, it's sort of amazing that such an icon of our industry and the creator of the Linux operating system is just a Google+ mention away. And so, of course, thanks to Linus. And then I think it's only appropriate that we wrap our thanks segment with Dennis Ritchie, who passed away this year, but of course helped create the C language, which we wouldn't have Linux. We wouldn't have so many of these things we're talking about.
Every single thing on our list here is written in C.
Yeah,
exactly.
Almost.
One of the most powerful operating system languages ever. It is the best. It's survived through the 70s, 80s, 90s, and right now we're still using it. And it's modified a bit, but the basic structure is still there. And it's surprising that something made in the 70s is still widely used and still very powerful today.
Right, and even like subsequent languages, we call them C-like because they use the same structures.
Right. And I don't even think I fully appreciate his contribution, but what I do grok and what I do understand, I know that we owe a great debt of gratitude to him. And hopefully he is resting in peace and his family is happy, and that they also appreciate the massive contribution he made to the society. So thanks to Dennis Ritchie. Thanks to Linus Torvalds. You know what? I'll even give a thanks to RMS for all of his hard work supporting Open. Oh, come on. He's done.
Yes.
Yes, yeah. GNU has been extremely important, and we got to give him credit for that. But I wanted to give specific mention to Dennis because he's a legend, and we lost him this year. So hopefully everyone out there has the project that they love, and I'd love for you to share them with us, like I mentioned in the comments. Do that, and I'll read through all of them. And I'm planning to do another one next year around this time, so maybe I'll incorporate some of them into that episode. All right, guys. Well, Randall, I think we'll let you go, but thanks for coming on the show and chatting about your favorite open source projects, man.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Talk to you soon.
All right.
All right, Alan. I think that's all we've got. Let's move in to the end of the show. And that brings us to the end of this week's Big Hugathon. Thanks to everyone for tuning in to this week's episode. Now, I have just a couple of obnoxious things to plug because, I'm going full-time, so now I actually have to think about making a profit and how I'm actually going to put food on the table for my kids. So I've got a couple things I want to tell you about. Before we jump into that, though, just a reminder, there is the Jupiter Signal. That's our new monthly newsletter. You can find a sign-up in the show notes. There's a little box you can fill out with your email address, or you can go to bit.ly/JupiterSignal. And that, my dear friends, is where you'll find new announcements and news about shows, ideas, behind-the-scenes information, recording schedules, all those. I can't hold up too many fingers at once, otherwise it'd be even more stuff. You'll find that in the Jupiter Signal, and it should be launching in the first week of December. Now, let's talk a little bit about ways that you can help me continue to put food on the table if you've enjoyed today's programming or any programming on the network. There's a couple of ways. Number one is if you are an advertiser or a company that wants to get your message out to a bunch of really smart people, contact me. You can go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com/advertise. If you are just a regular old audience member who doesn't have a multi-million-dollar company to sponsor us, not that it takes millions of dollars, but you know what I mean. You yourself can sponsor us directly by going to jupiterbroadcasting.com/donate, and in there you can set up either a monthly support, which is amazing, or a one-time donation. And you can do a little plug like Jungle Boogie did in our IRC chat room today. It's his birthday, and I believe his girlfriend donated $180 to say happy birthday to him, and that's amazing. That's awesome. So thank you very much for doing that, Jungle Boogie. I appreciate it. Now, if you don't have the money to spare because it is the holidays, I'm also frequently updating store.jupiterbroadcasting.com, where I put links to things that we've talked about in shows like, the Boxy Box, or audio books, or regular old books. I love this Rocket Man book. Or the Roku, an awesome Linux-powered media streamer. All of those, if you buy them through store.jupiterbroadcasting.com, we get a cut of the purchase. The great thing is if you buy any Amazon thing through there, like this book, if I click on this book and go over to Amazon's webpage, if I browse off and buy something else, Jupiter Broadcasting still gets credit for it. So it's kind of a nice way to give us a little something maybe while you're doing your shopping holidays and, help me do my shopping for the holidays.
Yep.
So
I definitely do that. And I did that with the hard drives we bought off Amazon for the ZFS server.
Alan, you're like one of the number one people that does that with these server builds. It's been awesome. So thank you for that. Yeah, because we also have, we'll have more information available soon, but we're setting up Newegg affiliates for the holidays. ThinkGeek affiliates. So all these different ways you guys can do your regular shopping and still just contribute to the network. And so that way we both get something. So thanks to everyone who does that. And thanks to everyone who visits jupiterbroadcasting.com/donate. I'm always trying to come up with ways to thank you. So I encourage you to leave a note. We do have a recognition wall that we keep up to date. And you can leave a comment in there for other people to come here and read. And I would also say, put your website in there so people can check out your site. So that way they know if you're a sponsor of the network, you're worth somebody checking out, and they can click on your URL. So include that with your note as well. All right, Alan, I think that wraps up the show, yeah?
I think so.
Nothing else to cover, really. Just you can catch this show live on Sundays over at jblive.tv at 10 a.m. Pacific, which is 1 p.m.
1 p.m. Eastern.
Look at me. I got it. I got it, Alan. I did it. That's amazing. Do you happen to have the UTC conversion?
1800.
Oh, look at you. Look at you. Yeah, I encourage you to join us live and hang out in the chat room and share your thoughts with us as we go. And then, of course, we always get a little extra show when you watch live. Because we started, at 10 a.m. and it's now 11:40 or so? Or, oh, no, my clock's
11:53.
Yeah, it's almost noon. And the show's not that long. So there's always extra show in the live version.
You definitely get a lot more when you watch live.
Yeah. Plus, we like to see your shiny little IRC handles.
Yeah.
All right, everyone.
People post questions in the chat room and we answer them.
Yeah, and it's actually really nice because in between the segment breaks, we'll sit here and kind of get feedback on what we said and said, okay, do we need to address something or should we mention something? And, it's a great way to give some dynamic input into the show. And it's also just a little more fun because you get to hang out with
It is a lot of fun.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Well, thanks so much for tuning into this week's episode of the Linux Action Show. And we'll see you right back here next week.